Hello, everyone, and welcome to the lunch keynote presentation today. My name is Jill Cox-Cordova, and I'm a Nonfiction Associate Editor with the Library Journal. I'll be moderating this discussion, but first, I'd like to thank the many sponsors and partners who helped make today quite possible. Please show them your support by visiting their booths in the exhibit hall. They have all kinds of giveaways and resources for your library or classroom. My discussion today is with the fantastic author who not only dares to ask why poverty persists in the United States, but he also boldly answers. I'm so excited and honored to welcome the Pulitzer Prize-winning author, Matthew Desmond, author of Poverty by America, forthcoming to be published by Crown in March. Welcome, Matthew.
Hey, Jill, thank you.
I'm so excited to talk to you.
I'm excited to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's start with the definition of poverty.
Yeah.
In your book, you say it isn't just about income or having enough money, and it isn't a line either. So what is it to you?
It's a national disgrace, it's a misery. It's a blunting of human potential. It's the dream killer, it's a problem that's tied to so many other social maladies. And so you're right? The normal way to talk about poverty is like, you got an income line. If you're below that line, you're poor. So the line last year for a single person was about $14,000 a year. If you made less than that, you're part of the giant, massive poverty population in America. But if poverty was just an income level problem, it would be a much easier thing to deal with. It's this tight knot of problems. It's about health and mental health. It's about your exposure to violence and crime. It's embarrassing. It's shame-inducing, right? And there's a lot of flags flying these days for various causes, not for poverty though. It's almost more acceptable to claim any other identity than to say that I'm broke. And so it is this tight cluster of problems, and it's one of the deeper domestic issues we have. And I think, frustratingly, it's something that's totally within our capacity to change. One of the things the book hits on, right, is poverty is about the lack of choice. And it hits on that hard because, if you don't have choice, you're exploitable, right? You're over a barrel. And so big part of the lived experience of poverty, I think, is to being forced to take bad deal after bad deal after bad deal, which means that part of the solution to poverty isn't just about increasing the minimum wage or, an income bump. It's really about empowering the poor.
Yes. You did quite a bit of research for this book, and I'd like to highlight some of the biggest startling facts that I read. 38 million people in this country cannot afford basic necessities. You also found that if America's poor founded a country, that country would have a bigger population than Australia or Venezuela. And then the most disturbing one of all, which you talk about extensively in the book, is that many people benefit from poverty, which is, as you said, shameful and embarrassing. So you dispelled a lot of myths. So what's the biggest revelation that you learned in researching this book?
I learned a ton, and I think that, I wrote this book almost for myself, to say, look, I've been researching and writing on poverty for years and years, but do I really have an answer for why there's so much poverty in this land of dollars and what we can do to actually eliminate it, not reduce it by 10 points or fiddle around the edges, but really cut the cancer out when it comes to ending poverty in America. And so, this book is my attempt to answer those questions for myself. And I think one of the big revelations was about welfare dependency and how we just get that totally backwards, and we heard this in COVID a lot where, folks got a little bit of a bump up in their unemployment benefits, and people just were losing their minds and saying, this is why people aren't returning to work. This is what happens when you give people government subsidies. And it kind of made sense, you know, people were getting paid more to stay at home than go to work, but it just wasn't true, actually. You know, when states ended some of those benefits, those states didn't experience this massive increase in job numbers compared to states that held on to the benefits. And when you dig into the data, the bigger issue is not welfare dependency, it's welfare avoidance. It's people that could really use some help, just not accepting it. You know, only about 1 in 5 elderly Americans who qualify for food stamps actually take them. Only about 1 in 5, you know, 1 in 5 workers who qualify for the earned income tax credit, this giant kind of once a year subsidy for working parents. They reject that benefit over and over and over again. And, you know, that adds up by my count. You know, low-income families are leaving, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars on the table every year in unclaimed aid. They're, you know, folks are frankly really bad at being welfare dependent. I wish they were better at it. And I wish that we as a country invested as many resources and much talent and thought to getting people the help they need as we do to like allowing me to buy a bag of potato chips on my phone and have it delivered on my doorstep. It's also like, it's also the case, right, that our welfare state is just totally lopsided. You know, we're giving more help to families that need it the least, you know. Like last year, homeowners, property owners received about $193 billion in subsidies from the government. But that same year, we only spent about $50 billion on direct housing assistance to the needy. These are families that are in public housing or getting a rent-reducing voucher. So this massive difference. And, you know, wealthy folks are quite good at receiving and drawing the benefits that are offered to them. And so not only do we have this welfare dependency story kind of upside down, the welfare state itself is really misshapen. And it, for me, it makes me think, look, what we're talking about when we're talking about ending poverty isn't redistributing wealth. It's really rebalancing the safety net and making sure our priorities really match our values.
Why do you think that they're not better at taking it? And you also wrote about how even when they're willing to take it, it's not reaching them directly.
Right. So we thought that the issue used to be shame. You know, it used to be people were embarrassed. They didn't really want to draw on the government. But there's not a lot of evidence for that, actually. You know, so it used to be the case that food stamps were like literally stamps, right? And you might remember this, where you'd be in the checkout and you'd have to put the stamps. And so people thought, well, you know, people aren't using this benefit because that's like this degradation ritual. And so we switched it to a card, just like a normal EBT card that you swipe in the machine that looks like a Visa or anything. And when we did that, there wasn't really a big uptick in food stamps. It wasn't like people were just waiting at home saying, oh, now I can use it. So what's going on then? What's going on is we've made it really hard for people to apply for the benefits. We've made it difficult, baffling, confusing. Sometimes people don't even know that there's benefits that are offered to them. And so this is one of the moments in the book where like a little goes a long way. You know, there are these experiments that show that like, if you just like make the font bigger, more inviting, less words, like you have this huge uptick in people drawing on programs that are incredibly beneficial to them and their children. And so there is like a lot of low-hanging fruit here about getting folks the benefits better that are already offered them.
You spoke about how the wealthy are good at accepting the benefits. And so one of you offer many solutions, I think, in this book. And one of them is that if the wealthy would simply pay their bill, right, there would be less poverty. And you also talk about poverty abolitionists. So tell us more about that. Sure.
So, I mean, one of the discoveries I made while researching this book is, you know, one of the ways of thinking about ending poverty is just say, okay, what is the gap separating poor families in America from just the poverty line? Like how much money would need to fill that gap just to bring everyone up to the poverty line? And the answer, without getting too technical, is about $177 billion. $177 billion a year just to bring folks to the line. If the top 1% of Americans just paid the taxes they owed, not not had their taxes increased or anything, just paid what they owed now, that would be about $175 billion a year. So, if we just had tax enforcement and tax fairness, that could basically fill the poverty gap every year. So the book argues hard for that, it goes hard for that, but it also doesn't want us to just look at the top 1% and say, gosh, if you guys paid your taxes. It really does ask a lot of us, those of us who are college educated, who are secured, who are homeowners, who are protected, to ask, how do we contribute daily to poverty in America? How do we benefit from it? And how can we unwind ourselves from it? And that's the project of poverty abolitionism. Poverty abolitionism is the recognition that I'm part of the problem and the recognition that I'm part of the solution. So, when we think of, the labor market and the low wages in the labor market and the fact that millions of Americans are working for poverty wages today, who benefits from that? So you could think, well, the shareholders benefit from it, but the shareholders aren't just, these 12 guys in a Manhattan boardroom. They're about half the country. About half the country is vested in the stock market in some way. If we have a retirement plan, if we're saving for our kids' college, we're the shareholders. We should evaluate who we're vested in. We like low prices, and those low prices cost, and what they cost is a kind of a human sacrifice. And so I think that we can think about reevaluating our consumer choices. We can think about looking at our institutions and our neighborhoods and how we contribute to poverty in those ways. So I think, ending poverty in America, it's going to take new policies. It's going to take new social movements. But I think it's also going to take a moral recognition for a lot of us to make this a personal problem. And this is one of the big thrusts of the book, too.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of helping others, from our audience, we have a comment and a question from Mary I'm sorry, Mary. I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, but she writes, I have had to spend a great deal of time assisting my elderly mother and disabled brother get the benefits they need and are entitled to. Neither of them are really capable of doing this for themselves. I can't help but wonder what happens to all of the people who do not have family or friends to assist them. Often people need help just finding the social workers who are available to help them.
Yeah, Mary, I'm so sorry you've been dealing with that. I write in the book about my friend Wu in Milwaukee, who I met when I was writing my last book, Evicted. And, Wu got his leg amputated. He had diabetes, he got an infection, he let it go for too long, and he lost his leg. And I met him in the hospital, and we had this kind of intimate moment together. And then we started the process of applying for disability for him. And I applied for disability with him and went through the paperwork with him, and his application got rejected. And Wu wasn't surprised. He was like, this is the normal course of things. I need to hire a lawyer. And so he eventually hires a disability lawyer, not because he has a lawyer, but because the lawyers work on commission. They, basically if they win the disability case, they get to take a chunk of the back pay. And that's exactly what Wu did. And that's how he got on disability. And then I looked into the data and I learned that over $1 billion every year in disability funds isn't going to folks like your brother. It's going to lawyers to help people like your brother get on disability. So you're absolutely right. We've kind of created these systems. We've made it hard on purpose. And then a lot of that loss of money is one of the reasons, one of the big puzzles in the book is, why has poverty been persistent even though we're spending more to fix it? And, one of the answers is that we're not spending it very, very efficiently. In fact, a lot of these programs are designed in a way that just has to be called mean.
Well, I'm concerned about you, Matthew. You spent a lot of time researching this book and spending time with such a heavy topic because poverty is traumatic. So how did researching and writing this book impact you?
Well, I've had the opportunity to live in very poor neighborhoods, to write about families in those neighborhoods. I've met folks below the poverty line all over the country, mobilizing for fair housing, being members of the working homeless. And I've gotten so much joy and perspective out of those conversations and those relationships. One of the stories I write about in the book is this group in Minneapolis I was spending time with. It was a tenants organization made up of a lot of different folks, new immigrants, undocumented immigrants, low-income white and Black folks. A lot of languages spoken, and folks had to communicate across language barriers with a Google Translate app, on their cell phones. But they really mobilized against their landlord, who they found abusive and neglectful, and they mobilized to get his property back into their hands. They were making these crazy asks, these really hard asks, like buying property worth, multi-million dollars and turning it into tenant cooperatives. And they mobilized and mobilized and mobilized, and it kind of came to a head. And there were eviction hearings, but they also had raised enough money to actually make the purchase. And so they were either going to be homeless or homeowners. And uniquely, an eviction case came to a jury trial, and we were waiting for the jury to deliberate the verdict. And I was sitting next to this woman named Takara. Takara has face tattoos. She's been down the line, a single mom of kids. And she said, what's taking the jury so long? They're asking, why do these tenants want such a raggedy building? People have forgotten, people forgot how did she put it? She put it people don't remember how to dream anymore, and it was so powerful and so convicting. It was have I forgotten how to dream? Have I forgotten how to ask ambitious things? And the tenants won, that battle, and they won those buildings. And so the book tries to impart some of the knowledge that and the wisdom that I've gained from those relationships. I think also writing this book was convicting for me, and it was, forced me to ask, okay, how is my family bound up in this problem? And a lot of us, we shop with our values, but a lot of times economic justice isn't a value that we're putting forth, we buy organic fruit or vegetables, but we don't ask how much the farm workers made picking them. We know our carbon footprint when we make a flight. Google Flight tells us this is our carbon footprint, but it doesn't tell us if the airlines are unionized or not. And so I think it really convicted me to take an audit of my own life and our own choices and consumption and saving patterns that we're making as a family, and try to divest from poverty.
We have a few more questions from the audience. SNMG asked, how did you become interested in researching poverty?
Well, I grew up pretty poor. I grew up in a small town in Arizona, and money was always tied around my table. We had the gas shut off all the time. We finally lost our home before it was all the rage. And so I think that mattered for me and what I saw that do to my family. But then I went to college, and I saw something I really hadn't seen in my little town growing up, which was just money, just so much money, and I went to a state school I went to Arizona State University, and I was in Phoenix, and some of my classmates were driving Jeeps and BMWs, and it was just this perplexing thing to me. And I think that launched me on this mission to understand how so much poverty exists in this land with such abundance and so many resources. And then I think, going down that road and living in super poor neighborhoods in Milwaukee for my last book just really reinforced the pain and misery that poverty really is, and what it does to people's lives, and how it just cuts them short, reduces people born for better things. And so I think that's probably the origin story. I think a lot of writers, I'm better talking about an issue than I am about myself, but.
You're doing great. Jen asked, many of the families in our school come from generational poverty. Is there a way to break that cycle?
Yes, totally. And so I think that, the book takes that question incredibly seriously. It doesn't just have like a concluding policy chapter or a few paragraphs. It devotes like the last third of the book is really devoted to an argument about how we can abolish poverty in America. And it basically makes three arguments. We need to make deeper investments in ending poverty. And we have the resources to do it. We just need to rebalance the safety net. But we also need policies that don't just accommodate poverty, but really disrupt it. Let me just give you a quick wonky example. One of the biggest anti-poverty policies we have is the earned income tax credit. Once a year, working families, they get a couple $1,000 on average in February, and it's kind of this income subsidy. It helps, it really does. And it's very popular and it has bipartisan support, but it also decreases wages, right? It's both something that alleviates poverty, but also is a handout to corporations. I think we need to rethink that. We need not just deeper policies, but different ones. And so the book also argues that we need to empower the poor. We need to invest in policies that provide poor people more power, more choice. So like in the labor market, that means investing in things like union power and labor organizing. This is a different economy and we need different kind of labor organizing than we did, in the golden years of, the 50s and 60s, as they're kind of often thought of with respect to labor organizing. And we're seeing these models now. We're seeing really interesting, nimble, multiracial labor organizing happen all around the country, which I'm really excited about. In the housing market, we need to make sure that poor families have more choice than just renting a crummy apartment in an overpriced way because they can't do anything else. So this means things like investing in small dollar mortgages to make sure that homes that are affordable go to working families that can afford them instead of, being kind of recouped by investors or outside property owners just to squeeze families a little bit more. So I think that things we can do to empower families to expand their choice is a real winning solution. And then we need to tear down our walls. We need to finally end our evil embrace of segregation. We need to welcome diverse communities. And we need to diversify our schools and diversify our neighborhoods economically. Integration really works. And many of us are living behind the wall. We're living in affluent communities. We literally make it impossible for low-income families to move in there because of zoning laws. And we need to let go of that tradition. And we need to say, no, like in my community, I want you to build this housing. I want you to provide opportunities to those kids that are the same as the opportunities that my kids benefited from. So we have the solutions. We have the resources. We don't need to outsmart this problem. I think we need to out-hate it.
Last question. We have less than 5 minutes left. It comes from Mary. Have you ever considered writing young adult versions of your book, or are they already appropriate for young people to read?
Well, I had a 7th grader buy Evicted the other day at a book stand, and I said, there's some language in this book, so just tell your kids. But I do think, that, look, eviction and poverty, this is a kid's issue as much as anything else. If you go into any eviction court around the country, you see a ton of kids running around. Until recently, the eviction court in the South Bronx literally had a daycare inside of it because there were so many kids. And so wow. I'm trying to write, I think that it's not only, appropriate for a young person to engage with this book. I think it's incredibly relevant to so many young people around the country. What's been happening to the job market and us walking away from the standard employment benefits that, previous generations had, that's a young person's issue. The fact that our cities are getting more expensive, and that young people are shut out of the dream of homeownership, that's a young person's issue. So I do think that, there is a way that that this book speaks to and tries to reflect the experience of young people. I'm exploring the possibility of turning Evicted into a children's book. I have a meeting next week on that. I don't know if we'll do that or not. There's a draft of it. It's challenging, but I think that I would like to write something that allows children who have experienced eviction and homelessness to see themselves in the story and to feel something other than shame or embarrassment, to kind of turn their personal problem into a political one in a way. So I'm trying. I'm trying. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we could look forward to that too.
Maybe.
Maybe. Or do you have something else that you're working on that you can talk about?
So my biggest priority right now is just getting the word out about this book, and trying to use this book to spark a national conversation about poverty in our communities. And so that means working with anti-poverty organizations. I'm building a website that's going to launch with the book so that readers can kind of get connected to these organizations in their communities and around the country. So I think that my big push right now is getting the word out on this critically, morally urgent issue that is so within our grasp to confront. It just is. I also have to say, because I'm here with all these librarians, that so many librarians are at the forefront of this crisis, and librarians aren't just responsible for fighting the good fight in the culture war right now, protecting and shepherding knowledge, but you're responsible for bathrooms that anyone can use, and computers that you can learn languages on and apply for jobs on, and just a warm place that's open to everyone. And so I thank you not only for your work you do in the service of books and words and sentences and beauty, but also just what you do for so many folks around the country that are relying on libraries because there's nowhere else to go. So thank you.
And thank you, Matthew, for this wonderful conversation. I hope that everyone is encouraged now and to go out and disrupt poverty, as you said. So we appreciate this conversation and this call to action. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Next, we have 2 concurrent sessions: fun facts, notable nonfiction picture books, and literary fiction. And remember that all the sessions are recorded and will be available in the live sessions area shortly after they end. So thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Jill. Appreciate you so much.